Hey guys, and welcome back to another missing persons case on my channel. Just quickly, I want to address the fact that it is a little bit darker in here than usual. I'm not really sure what's going on. I've tried to adjust the lighting a few times, but it's just not working out for me today. So bear with me with that throughout this video. This missing persons case is about a little boy by the name of Dennis Martin, who was 6 years old when he disappeared. And this case has kind of like a very creepy feel to it for me. It almost seems a little bit paranormal, but it is still very tragic and very interesting. So I'm going to tell the story of what happened and then touch base on the theories in the background. So it was Father's Day weekend in 1969, and the Martins had a tradition that every Father's Day, all of the Martin men would go on a camping trip. So this included Dennis's brother, his father Bill Martin, and his grandfather Clyde Martin. So I'm not sure if every Father's Day weekend they always went to the same place or if they switched it up, but on this particular Father's Day, they went to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park in Tennessee. The first night that the Martins had arrived at the national park, they had hiked a little bit and then stopped at a certain area and spent the night. And then the next morning they had woken up and they had hiked a little bit more and they had stopped at Spence Field, which I believe is very, very close to the Appalachian Trails. And they had stopped there and set up camp and were going to stay there for the night. So at this new spot in Spence Field, another family had actually come over and asked Bill if their two children could play with his two children. And Bill, of course, agreed. And the odd thing about this other family is that their last name was actually Martin as well. So the four children were playing together, and I believe they were playing hide and go seek. And just something that I need to throw in here is that Bill had later said in an interview that the children were so close to him that he could have thrown a stick or a rock and it would have hit either Dennis or his older brother. Because some people seem to believe that these children were running around on their own in the forest, but they weren't. So that's just something to keep in mind. So while the children were playing hide and go seek around 4:30, they had decided to hide and jump out and scare the adults. But Dennis was wearing a very bright colored shirt. I believe it was red. So the older children didn't want him to give away their hiding spot. So they had said to him, you know what, you hide on that side of the path and we'll hide on this side of the path, and then we'll all jump out at the same time and scare the adults. So Dennis had agreed and he had gone off to his own hiding spot while the other three went to the other side of the trail and hid together. So Bill had walked down the path after a minute or two after wondering what the kids had gotten up to because he hadn't seen them for a couple minutes. And that's when the older children had jumped out to scare him. So they had laughed for a couple seconds, and then Bill had noticed that Dennis was not among the children that had jumped out at him. So he thought at first that maybe his youngest son had missed his cue to jump out. But after a few more seconds had passed, he kind of, I guess, got a little bit worried. So he went to check behind the bushes where Dennis should have been, but Dennis was nowhere to be found. So I believe both Martin families had begun looking for Dennis immediately after they noticed he was missing. They were yelling his name, they were looking all over, through the tents, through everything, and they couldn't find him. So about 10 minutes after they had started looking, either Clyde or Bill had gotten into the truck and drove down to the ranger station to inform the park rangers that they had lost a 6-year-old in the park. So then I believe the park rangers actually sent back a group of park rangers. So there was a fairly large group of people looking for Dennis, and it wasn't even a half an hour after he had gone missing. And this search went on until nightfall. And that's when a really, really bad storm came in and a lot of fog and rain and just bad weather conditions that pretty much prevented anybody from looking any further for Dennis. Bill admitted that at first, when Dennis was missing, he wasn't too concerned, as he thought that maybe he had wandered off or maybe he was playing a trick on them, that he'd just taken too far. He was only 6, so there was a possibility that he thought he was being funny, and he wasn't too concerned. But the next morning, when his son still hadn't turned up, that's when he became worried. As Dennis was so young, this case got a lot of publicity right away and gained public attention almost immediately. And the following day that Dennis had gone missing, there was almost 300 people out looking for him, including park rangers, volunteers, tons and tons of people. And so the news was spreading pretty quickly that there was a 6-year-old boy lost in this national park. And that's when a man by the name of Harold Keyes had come forward with this information. He had said that on the night that Dennis had gone missing, I guess it was about an hour after Dennis had gone missing, Harold and his son were looking for bears, and they were about 6 to 9 miles away from where Dennis had gone missing, and they had heard a blood-curdling scream. And shortly after they had heard this scream, they had seen a very burly, hairy, thick, huge man walking with something slung over his shoulder. And this man was actually so huge and hairy and like unkept that at first glance, Harold's son thought that this was a bear. In fact, he had told his father that he had seen a bear. So you can only imagine how big and hairy this man must have been. But police had said, since it was only an hour after Dennis had gone missing, that they were not in close enough proximity to consider this being related to Dennis's case, and they never investigated it. So the search for Dennis had been going on for about 3 months now, and that's when the FBI had come forward to Dennis's mother and told her that they had found a small footprint in and around the areas where Dennis's family was camping, and they had also found a young boy's underwear. But Dennis's mother had discredited this, as she had said that Dennis didn't own a pair of underwear that looked like the ones that they had shown her. So that seemed unlikely. And I think that this is pretty possible. I mean, when you're camping, you do take off your shoes and walk around barefoot, and you do leave clothes where you shouldn't and things like that. So it's very likely that these could have belonged to absolutely any child who was also camping in the woods with their family. And a few months after that, a hunter had actually come forward, and he was illegal hunting in the area, and he had told police that a few months prior, just after Dennis had disappeared, he had come across what looked like a young child's skull in the area in and around where they had found the footprint and the underwear, and was in close proximity to the area that Dennis had disappeared. But by the time he'd come forward with this information, it was too late, and investigators did go to investigate what he was saying, but they couldn't find a skull, and they couldn't find any evidence that Dennis was anywhere around that area, and neither was any other small child. So now I'm going to get into theories, and I'm going to first touch base on 2 theories that I don't think are very likely, and I'm going to kind of combine them together as they do kind of go together. So the first one is that Dennis had wandered off. Now, the reason that I don't think that this is possible is because, like I said at the beginning of the video, the search for Dennis took place almost immediately after he'd gone missing. It was within minutes of him going missing. So you'd think that he would be close enough if he just wandered off to hear his dad frantically calling his name, along with his grandpa and his brother and the other people that were on the campsite with them. And he was so small, I don't think that he would have been able to get so far away that the park rangers and the Martins and the other Martin family couldn't find him. And the next theory that I'm going to kind of smush in with this one is that he either wandered off and got eaten by an animal, or he got picked up and carried away by an animal. And the reason that I don't think this is possible is because, like I've mentioned in one of my other videos, I think that if you get eaten by an animal, especially in the wilderness, there will be remnants of you. I mean, Dennis's shoe probably would have fallen off, his clothes would have been torn, you would have found fragments of something left behind. I mean, there is a possibility he was a very young child. Maybe he was taking hide and go seek too far, and maybe he had wandered off and hid in a small crevice where nobody could find him, or maybe he had hidden in a small crevice and something had happened to him, or he got injured and he couldn't get out. But I just think that it's very unlikely that he had gotten so far away in such a short period of time that they didn't find any remnants of him at all. But I do think that, I guess, it is a little bit possible, and there is some ways that this could have happened. I just think it's very unlikely. And the third and last theory that I'm going to touch base on is that Dennis Martin was abducted by like a Sasquatch, Bigfoot kind of guy. And I know that sounds crazy, but it kind of goes hand in hand with Harold Keyes and his family's sighting of the big man who resembled a bear in the woods. And so I guess the way that this had come about is the Keyes family report had actually gone public, and I guess the public had gotten wind of what they had seen and what they had heard shortly after Dennis had gone missing. And somebody had actually come to the park ranger and said to him, you know, if you don't think that that guy in the woods that that family had seen had anything to do with Dennis Martin, aren't you curious what he was doing in the woods? This was a huge guy, like he resembled a bear, like the child thought he was a bear. Aren't you curious what he was doing in the woods? And the park ranger had said to him, there are a lot of sightings of wild men in these woods. meaning that these are people who live off the land, they are recluse, they're not a part of society, they possibly never were a part of society, so they don't have any social skills, you know, they're not up to social norm, they're just people that live in the woods, they're like Sasquatch or Bigfoot. Now that doesn't explain why the guy was so huge, but it does explain what the keys could have seen. And I think this theory is absolutely possible because I just don't think that Dennis would have been smart enough to wander off by himself, and an animal wouldn't have done a very good job of keeping a scared 6-year-old quiet. But a person could have. They could have covered his mouth, they could have used other forms and tactics to keep Dennis from screaming, they could have done lots of other things. And the reason that the police didn't investigate this is because they thought that the sighting of the man was way too far off from where Dennis had originally gone missing. But if this person lives in the woods, they've never been out of the woods, you know, they're obviously very athletic and they're very fast probably and very, you know, outdoorsy, it might not have stopped them and they might have been able to cover that much ground in such a short period of time. This case is strikingly similar to multiple other missing persons cases that have taken place in national parks, and you can find these missing persons cases in Missing 411 by David Paulides. Now, I'm not going to touch base too much on these other cases right now, and I'm not really going to get into the theory behind that, as I can go on forever and ever about that. But if you guys want to see a whole other video on that, please comment that down below. But it is very, very interesting stuff, and if you don't want to see a video on it, I highly suggest you go and check out Missing 411 for yourselves. I personally think that a person must have taken Dennis. I just don't see how it is possible that a 6-year-old could have covered that much ground in such a short period of time, that nobody has ever found anything of his or him at all. I just think that that's such a wide range of space for a 6-year-old to cover by himself in such a short period of time. I mean, it was only like 5 to 10 minutes. That's insane. So I personally think that a human must have had a hand in this missing persons case. Like in all of these videos, but especially in videos like these where young children go missing, my heart really, really goes out to the Martin family and all of Dennis's loved ones, and I really hope that someday there can be closure in this case. Something's got to give and something has to be found to absolutely close this so that the people that love Dennis can get some closure. And guys, that brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and also comment down below what you'd like to see in my future content, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye guys!